My marriage had always been steady, built on routine and trust. My husband and I had been together for years, and though the spark had dimmed over time, I never questioned our commitment. Love, after all, wasn't just about passion. It was about loyalty, understanding, and the quiet comfort of knowing someone would always be there. I had never considered myself the type to stray, never imagined I'd find myself standing on the edge of something forbidden. But life has a way of unraveling certainty when you least expect it. His best friend had always been a part of our lives. He was practically family, always around for birthdays, holidays, and quiet evenings spent reminiscing over old stories. I had never looked at him as anything more than my husband's closest companion, someone I trusted without hesitation. But that night, something shifted. It was supposed to be a casual gathering, just dinner, drinks, and laughter filling the space as it always did. My husband was engaged in conversation across the room, unaware of the way his best friend's eyes lingered on me for just a second too long. At first, I thought I had imagined it, but when I glanced up again, I saw it clearly, a look that felt different, something heavier than a passing glance. A warmth crept up my skin, unexpected and unfamiliar. I should have looked away, should have dismissed it as nothing. But I didn't. Instead, I held his gaze for a moment too long, curiosity flickering where it had no business existing. It was subtle, barely noticeable to anyone else. But between us, it carried weight. Later, when the noise had quieted and only a few remained, I found myself alone with him for the briefest moment. It was nothing unusual, just a break in conversation, a pause in the evening. But then he leaned in, voice low, his words carrying something dangerous. "I don't think you even realize how captivating you are." The air between us shifted. My breath hitched. This was not a joke, not a harmless compliment. It was an invitation. I should have laughed, brushed it off, stepped away before the moment could turn into something more. But I didn't. I stood there, heart pounding, the weight of his words settling deep inside me. And in that instant, everything changed. His words echoed in my mind long after they were spoken. I told myself they didn't mean anything, that he had simply been caught in the moment, that the drinks had loosened his tongue. But the way he looked at me, the way his voice had dipped just low enough to feel like a secret, made it impossible to forget. I convinced myself I was overthinking, that I was reading too much into something meaningless. Yet, when I saw him again, the shift between us was undeniable. The easy friendship we had once shared was no longer effortless. There was an awareness now, a quiet tension that hadn't existed before. I became hyper-aware of his presence in ways I never had before. The way he carried himself, the way his confidence filled the room, the way his eyes found mine a second longer than they should. I noticed how he listened more intently when I spoke, how his laughter felt directed at me, even in a group setting. Every small interaction felt different, heavier. I tried to shake it off, to pretend nothing had changed, but I started catching myself seeking him out in a crowded room, noticing when he arrived, feeling something stir inside me when he was near. It was dangerous, this feeling, thrilling yet terrifying. The conversations between us took on a new depth. There was an ease between us, but now it carried something unspoken. The pauses between words stretched a little longer, the air filled with something neither of us addressed. He would say things that felt more personal, ask questions that felt more intimate, and I answered without hesitation. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just imagining things, that no real lines had been crossed. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. The way I felt in his presence, the way my heart raced when he was near, was proof enough that something had already begun. I should have stopped it then. I should have created distance before temptation turned into action. But I didn't. I let the thoughts linger, let the feeling grow, let myself enjoy the attention. And in doing so, I unknowingly set everything in motion. The moment was supposed to pass, to fade into nothing like a fleeting thought. But it didn't. It stayed, lingering between us, unspoken, but undeniably real. I told myself that it was harmless, that nothing had happened, that nothing would happen. But deep down, I already knew that was a lie. The next time we were alone, it wasn't by accident. I had convinced myself that I was just being friendly, that there was no danger in continuing as we always had. But the difference was clear from the start. The space between us felt smaller, the air heavier. I could feel the tension in every glance, in every pause between words. He leaned against the counter, watching me, his expression unreadable. I wasn't imagining it, was I? His voice was quiet, careful, but there was no doubt in his tone. He knew. We both knew. I could have denied it. I could have laughed, changed the subject, done anything to steer us back into safe territory. But instead, I held his gaze for just a second too long, the silence answering for me. "You don't have to say anything," he continued, stepping closer. I've noticed you for a long time. I never said anything because I knew I shouldn't. But now?" He hesitated, as if waiting for me to stop him. "I didn't. I should have walked away. I should have thought about my husband, about the years we had built together, about the life I was about to risk. But in that moment, all I could think about was how intoxicating it felt to be wanted." His fingers brushed against mine, a touch so light it could have been accidental. But it wasn't. He didn't move away, didn't pretend it didn't happen, neither did I. The air between us crackled with something dangerous, something reckless. My breath caught in my throat, my body frozen in place, waiting. He stepped in just slightly, testing the moment, searching my expression for hesitation. There was none. Then, his lips were on mine, and I let it happen. I didn't pull away, didn't stop him. I kissed him back, knowing exactly what I was doing, and just like that, the line I thought I'd never cross was already behind me. What should have ended with that first kiss became impossible to stop. I told myself it was a mistake, that it would never happen again, but those words felt empty even as I thought them. The rush, the thrill, the way my heart pounded in a way it hadn't in years. I wasn't ready to let it go. We didn't talk about it, not at first. We pretended it hadn't happened, that we could go back to how things were before. But the truth sat between us like a secret too big to ignore. The glances lingered longer, the space between us felt smaller, and every moment we were alone crackled with undeniable tension. Then, one stolen moment turned into another, a touch that lingered too long, a brush of fingers that neither of us pulled away from. Excuses became easy to make. I found myself rearranging my schedule, creating reasons to see him, to be near him, to feel that surge of excitement that had become addictive. We became reckless, bolder with each encounter. Every interaction was an opportunity, every stolen second, another risk we were willing to take. Text messages sent late at night, conversations filled with words that danced on the edge of something dangerous. A thrill that was intoxicating, more consuming than I ever imagined. At home, I told myself I was still in control. My husband didn't suspect anything. He trusted me completely. He smiled the same way, kissed me the same way, never questioning the slight changes in my routine. That trust made it easier to lie, to pretend that everything was exactly as it had always been. The affair became a secret world, a place where nothing else existed. With him, I felt different, desired, alive, free from the weight of responsibility. It wasn't love, I knew that. It was something else entirely, something I couldn't name but wasn't ready to give up. I told myself it wouldn't last forever, that I would stop before it went too far. But the truth was, it had already gone too far. I was too deep, too lost in the deception, too caught up in the fire I had started. And worst of all, I wasn't sure I even wanted to put it out. The lies became second nature, slipping from my lips as effortlessly as breathing. At first, they felt unnatural, each one carrying a weight of guilt that settled deep in my chest. But the more I told them, the easier they became. I convinced myself that as long as I kept everything separate, no one would ever know. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves, no matter how well they're buried. My husband, who had always trusted me without question, began noticing the smallest changes. He didn't accuse me of anything. It wasn't suspicion yet, just curiosity. He asked why I was on my phone more than usual, why I seemed distant, why I had started taking longer to respond to messages. I smiled, gave him answers that sounded reasonable, excuses that weren't entirely untrue. He accepted them, at least for a while, but I could feel the shift. He watched me more closely, his eyes lingering when I was distracted, his conversations laced with unspoken questions. He sensed something was different, even if he couldn't name it yet. Friends started noticing too. A casual comment here, a raised eyebrow there. You seem different lately. You've been glowing. What's your secret? They meant nothing by it, just idle observations. But to me, every word felt like a warning. I laughed, brushed them off, acted like nothing had changed. But deep down, I knew they weren't wrong. Even he, the man I had risked everything for, noticed the danger. One evening, when we were alone, he leaned in close, his voice lower than usual. We need to be careful. He was right. The risks were growing, the lies piling up, the walls closing in around us. But neither of us wanted to stop. Every stolen moment was another chance to get caught. A glance held too long, a fleeting touch that could be noticed, an excuse that might not hold up if questioned too much. But instead of slowing down, instead of taking the warning signs seriously, I ignored them. I believed I was untouchable, that I could balance both lives without consequence. I told myself I was in control. But in reality, I was already standing at the edge, and the ground beneath me was beginning to crack. It was bound to happen. No secret lasts forever. No lie stays hidden indefinitely. I had convinced myself I was careful, that I was always one step ahead, that no one would ever know. But the truth has a way of surfacing when you least expect it. It started with something small, a simple mistake, barely noticeable, but enough to set everything in motion. A message left open on my phone, a look exchanged at the wrong time, a moment of carelessness that cracked the perfect illusion I had built. My husband noticed. He didn't say anything at first, but I could feel it in the way he watched me, in the way his questions became sharper, more deliberate. Who were you texting just now? The question seemed casual, but there was an edge to it, a weight I wasn't used to. I gave him the same easy lies I had always told, expecting him to accept them like he always had. But this time he didn't. He started paying attention in ways he never had before. The small details I had dismissed were the ones he started noticing. The sudden shift in my schedule, the way I was always checking my phone, the lingering tension between his best friend and me that had once gone unnoticed. It was as if, overnight, he had started seeing things clearly. Then came the real mistake, the moment that turned suspicion into certainty. I had thought we were alone, thought no one was watching, thought we had been discreet, but someone saw. A glance too intimate, a touch that lingered longer than it should have. Someone caught it, and word spread faster than I could control. It wasn't my husband who confronted me first. It was a friend. A quiet, knowing look, followed by a question that made my stomach drop. Is there something going on between you two? I denied it, laughed it off, tried to act like the idea was ridiculous, but the seed had been planted, and once doubt takes root, it grows faster than you can stop it. That night, my husband didn't just watch me, he studied me. The way I avoided his gaze, the hesitation in my answers, the way my hands trembled when he asked a question that hit too close. The truth wasn't out yet, but I could feel it. The walls were closing in, and it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart. The moment of reckoning arrived sooner than I expected. I had spent so much time weaving my web of lies, convincing myself I was untouchable, that I had control. But all it took was a single moment for everything to collapse. My husband stood in front of me, holding my phone in his hands. The screen was still glowing, displaying a message I had never meant for him to see. My stomach twisted as I realized what had happened. I had been careful, deleting messages, covering my tracks, but this time I had made a mistake. He didn't speak right away. He simply looked at me, his grip on the phone tightening as he processed what he was seeing. The silence between us was suffocating, stretching longer than I could bear. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but no excuse would be enough. Finally, his voice cut through the air, low and strained. "Is this what I think it is?" I could have lied. I could have tried to twist the truth, gaslight him into believing it wasn't what it looked like. But the exhaustion in his face, the quiet devastation in his tone, told me he already knew. He wasn't looking for an explanation. He was looking for confirmation. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "I didn't mean." His laugh was bitter, sharp. "You didn't mean to what? Get caught?" I flinched at the truth in his words. He wasn't shouting, wasn't breaking things, wasn't throwing accusations. His disappointment was worse than any rage could have been. Behind him, the door opened. His best friend, the man who had been part of our lives for years, stood frozen in the doorway. His eyes darted between us, panic flashing across his face. He knew. We all knew. "Say something," my husband said, his voice cracking slightly. "Tell me why you did this." I searched for an answer, but nothing came. What could I say? That I hadn't planned for this to happen? That I had been looking for something I couldn't even name? That I had destroyed my marriage for a moment that wasn't even worth it? His gaze lingered on me for a moment longer before he exhaled, shaking his head. Without another word, he walked away. And with him, he took everything I had once believed would last forever. The emptiness settled in quickly, heavier than I had anticipated. My husband was gone. The man who had once been my home, my safe place, had walked away without looking back. I had ruined everything, and there was no fixing it. The silence in the house was unbearable. Every room was a reminder of what I had lost. The dinner table, where we once shared quiet conversations after long days, now felt like a cold, empty space. The bed, once a place of comfort, felt too big without him in it. Everything around me reminded me of the life I had so carelessly thrown away. The best friend, the man I had risked everything for, was nowhere to be found. He hadn't called, hadn't checked in, hadn't even sent a message. The moment the truth came out, he vanished. What had once felt exciting, like a connection too powerful to resist, had proven to be nothing more than a fleeting distraction. I had convinced myself it was something deeper, something real, but in the end, it was meaningless. Friends who once stood by me now kept their distance. People whispered, their judgment clear in their careful avoidance. The invitations stopped coming, the messages became scarce, and even those who didn't say anything outright let their silence speak volumes. I was the woman who had betrayed her husband. That was the only thing they saw now. Family was no different. My mother's voice carried disappointment every time we spoke. My sister, who had once been my closest confidant, barely responded to my calls. They didn't have to say it. I already knew what they thought. I had destroyed my marriage for nothing, and now I had to live with that reality alone. I had thought the worst part would be losing my husband, but it wasn't. The worst part was knowing I had done this to myself. No one had forced me to make these choices. No one had pushed me into betrayal. I had walked into it willingly, telling myself I deserved more, that it wasn't wrong if no one found out. But now, everyone knew, and the weight of my choices would follow me forever. Some mistakes could be forgiven, but this wasn't one of them. Regret settled into every corner of my mind, relentless and unshakable. I had spent so much time chasing something I couldn't even define, convincing myself that I deserved more, that I was missing out on something. But now, looking at the ruins of my life, I realized I had been running from myself all along. I thought back to all the moments where I could have stopped, the times when I had a choice. The first time I felt the thrill of his attention, the moment his words sent a shiver down my spine, the night I let a kiss turn into something irreversible. Each time, I could have walked away. Each time, I could have chosen differently, but I hadn't. I had let the fire consume me, and now all that was left was ash. The loneliness was unbearable. The silence in the house stretched endlessly, a constant reminder that I had once been loved, once been trusted, and had thrown it all away for a temporary distraction. What I thought was passion was just destruction in disguise. I had mistaken attention for love, excitement for meaning. Now, with nothing left, I saw it for what it really was, a moment that never should have happened. I heard about my husband through mutual friends. He was moving forward, rebuilding his life without me. He wasn't drowning in sorrow or clinging to the past. He was healing, growing, becoming someone who no longer needed me. And the truth was, he had never deserved any of this. He had given me stability, loyalty, devotion, and I had given him betrayal in return. I had shattered something good for something temporary, something fleeting, and now the only thing I had left was the weight of my own choices pressing down on me. I had spent so much time trying to fill a void I didn't understand, but in the end, I had only made it deeper. The life I had once taken for granted was gone, and no matter how much I wished I could go back, some mistakes don't come with second chances. I had been searching for something more. Instead, I lost everything. There was no undoing what had been done. No amount of regret, no desperate wish to turn back time could erase the choices I had made. I had built a life, a marriage, a love that should have lasted forever, but in chasing something fleeting, something that never truly mattered, I had thrown it all away. The days blurred together in an endless cycle of silence and solitude. The house that had once been filled with warmth now felt like a hollow shell. The absence of my husband's presence was suffocating. I had never felt more alone. There was no closure, no dramatic confrontation to give me a sense of finality. He had simply walked away, and I was left to pick up the broken pieces. I had once thought he would fight for me, that maybe, despite everything, he would hold on, but he hadn't. He had seen me for what I had become, someone who had betrayed his trust, someone he could never look at the same way again. The whispers followed me everywhere. The people who once welcomed me with open arms now kept their distance. Some were polite, pretending not to judge, but I could see it in their eyes, the disappointment, the quiet disapproval. I had made my choices, and now I had to live with them. And the man I had risked everything for? He had vanished. No texts, no calls, no promises of a future together. He had walked away just as easily as he had walked into my life. It became painfully clear that I had never been special to him. I had been a moment, an indulgence, nothing more. For so long, I had believed I had control, that I could balance the thrill of the affair with the security of my marriage. But I had been wrong. Some mistakes are too big to fix. Some betrayals cut too deep to be forgiven. Now I was left with the consequences, with the knowledge that I had once held something precious and let it slip through my fingers. I had destroyed everything for nothing. And the worst part? I had no one to blame but myself.